the Extension Master Gardeners is going to go ahead and highlight sustainable gardening. All right, so Stephen, if you want to go ahead and screen share. Yep, okay, perfect. That's coming up. And go ahead and take it away.
Okay, am I loud enough?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, and Josh, do you want to be my moving my slides ahead?
So I think with you doing the screen share that you should have access for it.
Okay.
Yep.
Hey, there we go. Okay, perfect. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for staying with us tonight. Spring is in the air and we're thinking about gardens. A little bit early right now, I know, but when it gets this nice, it's hard not to think about that. So again, great job, Josh, of lining us up. A lot of the things I'll talk about have been touched on with our various wonderful participants. So this is great timing. So again, I am Stephen Eilers from Iowa State Extension and Outreach of Black Hawk County. I'm the Urban Ag Specialist. And here we go. So real quick, what we'll cover, the best practices for garden sustainability, where to plant, planting with others, growing season ideas, composting, seed saving, native plants, using chemicals, mulch, and watering. Starting with the basics, use planting space well. We get a lot of calls on this, and during our Master Gardener class, we get a lot of questions on where to plant. So you're going to want to plant your garden in full sun. There's an asterisk by that. Last summer was one of the hottest summers on record, and we've had kind of increasingly hot summers. If you can find a space that maybe offers a little afternoon shade, so by the time it gets maybe to 5 or 6 o'clock, that you have a little bit of shade on some of your plants. A lot of our plants actually don't do too well if they get too hot. They burn up. So having a little bit of later afternoon shade can actually be a blessing. Avoid wet spots in your landscape, in your yard, with bad drainage. That would be, again, referring back to Josh's presentation. That might not be a great space for a traditional garden, but that might be a great place for a rain garden. If you have soil that maybe not great, a lot of clay, a lot of rocks, just kind of worn out, and we get people who have very bad soil, a raised bed can do wonders. You get to control the soil in your bed, combination of store-bought soil or compost and a lot of other great ingredients. You can really create very nice growing conditions pretty much overnight, and for not a lot of money. Every couple of years, you just add a little more soil to it and you have a great spot. And if you ever have to move or take it down, it's really not that hard to undo as well. Consider mixing vegetable plants with your flower beds. If you have, well, you can say, well, my best sun hits my flower bed to the front of the house, but where I have the most room, I don't have the best sun. Well, there's nothing that says you can't put a tomato plant in with your zinnias or put a potato plant here and there. You would treat it just like any other garden soil, adding with the flowers. It actually is, they're going to blend right in. It's not going to look like a garden. It's going to look like a cool flower bed. And honestly, there's really nothing wrong with, if you have a limited space, making your flower beds into your garden space. A lot of people in bigger cities do that who have much smaller space than we're used to here. So that is another great option. Plan and plant with others. You don't have to plant everything, okay? What I mean by that is divide and conquer. Take turns. Now, we all know somebody who plants a lot of zucchini and has enough zucchini for everybody you know. I know people that plant 30 tomato plants. They have enough tomatoes for everybody. Same with cucumbers. There's a lot of things that grow really well. You yourself don't have to plant everything. Get with a neighbor, get with a sister, a cousin, somebody from your church, somebody from your work that is planting a garden. This also helps with crop rotation. So if you've planted tomatoes in the best spot for several, 2 to 3 years, you know you really shouldn't plant tomatoes are from that family there again, maybe this is your chance for that neighbor to do the tomatoes and the peppers this year. Maybe it's your turn for zucchini. Maybe your area is better suited for something. So you're going to work with your friend or neighbor or coworker or whoever it is. You kind of become your own CSA. So you don't have to plant everything. Plant to your strengths. Know what you do best. If you're someone who doesn't necessarily do great with tomatoes but love them, and you have a neighbor who does, maybe it's their turn to do the tomatoes this year. And again, not everybody needs to plant cucumbers. They start off small, they take over your yard. Same with zucchini. So spreading that out a little bit amongst your friends creates a little more interest, and you can kind of rotate the responsibilities around. And in the end, you still get all the great produce. You just didn't have to do it all yourself. Plan for a longer growing season. Again, Iowa weather, you know, we've had snow in May. We've had Cinco de Mayo little blizzards. We've had warm weather well into November. It's kind of up and down, very cold winters, very hot summers. But in the spring, there's a lot of great things you can start early, especially if you have any kind of little growing box or little small greenhouse. Radishes, lettuce, a lot of the greens like kale, spinach, mustard, carrots, peas, and turnips are all early season vegetables that you can have a good crop with earlier, really before the heat of the summer gets started. A lot of these don't do well in the heat, so you're going to want to benefit of having them early. As summer grows on, there are plants that love the heat. Sweet potatoes, various peppers, zucchini and summer squash, Swiss chard, okra, eggplant, green beans. These are all the heat plants. So those are the ones that you want to start later. A lot of these are started from plants I know that you buy. And again, these are going to be your hot lovers. Now, as the season cools off, if you've been paying attention, you know that we, like I mentioned, have some really warm days well through the early fall. And those are cooler nights, a little bit less sunlight, but still some wonderful growing conditions. So this is where you can get a repeat of some of your favorite things you planted maybe early in the season: radishes, lettuces, greens, carrots, peas, and turnips. And keep in mind, carrots can stay in the ground a very long time. They actually get sweeter after a first frost. Some of the other below ground plants can too. You know, you don't need to be pulled in August. Actually, they do well staying a little bit later. So this gives you a more sustainable, longer garden patch that you're starting in late spring and gardening well into the fall. So you get the benefit of these great vegetables for a longer growing season. Learning about compost. Obviously, we just learned a great deal from Tammy. I can't say anything new that she didn't say. We all know now what compost does. The picture there is very simple. As she said, you can use wood scraps, you can use wire, you can buy a system. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't need to be expensive. But compost is a wonderful, black gold. Compost is wonderful for your gardens, for your flower beds, for even in your pots, mixed in with the different types of soil. So if you're not composting, give it a try. It doesn't need to be huge. You don't need to spend a lot of time and money. You don't need to buy a tractor. You can also use the compost that many of our cities, Cedar Falls and Waterloo, do tremendous composting, and they're big piles, and it's turned well and watered. They get hot enough to kill the bacteria and the bad seeds, and it's free, especially after some of the bad weathers we've had. There's been a lot of stuff composted, and they have mounds and mounds of it available. So if you've not tried it, start off with a small amount, see what you think. You can buy some while you're making your own. So there's a lot of great options. Seed saving and seed exchange. We talked some of this with the tallgrass prairie on the prairie seeds. Your garden is full of next year's seeds. Full. That's where seeds come from. When you buy the seeds in the package, they were in a garden growing somewhere in mass and were simply collected. Saving your seeds saves you money. It's oddly satisfying. There is something very neat about going to the garden and collecting seeds. Be willing to share your seeds with others. Every zinnia petal is next year's zinnia. And zinnias are so plentiful. Do you know how many seeds you can get just by going out and plucking the petals at the right time? So share them with others. If you have a garden friend and you see something really fantastic in their garden, most gardeners are willing to share. So say, hey, can you save me one of those? Can you pick me? Can you cut the head off and save me one or two of those? And do the same for them. You'll get a lot more bang for basically no bucks. You have the seed exchange party in the late fall, where almost like the cookie walks that they have, where you can have a seed walk. Harvest seeds at the right time. Obviously, you want to get where the seeds are going to be drying out at the end of their life cycle, but don't wait too long. You'll be fighting birds. Again, don't leave some for the birds, leave some for the animals. Don't starve them out. But odds are, if you've planted any type of flower bed or seeds, there is a lot to be had for both of you. Store them properly to avoid rot, not in sealed Ziploc bags, or you'll have a mess on your hands. Don't leave things out in the very cold in your garage. You might want to bring them to your basement. And label. You might know right now which ones are which ones, but in 6 months you might not. I once had 3 cool, like the old school squash pumpkins. I had a blue one, a cheese wheel, and a white one. And I gutted them, and I took all the seeds out, put them in individual things, did not label them that day. No idea which one was which. So make sure you label. And again, using paper envelopes or paper bags is really your best method after they've been dried. Going back to, we talked about native plants with the tall grass prairie. Your whole garden doesn't need to be vegetables. It can be a mix of vegetables and flowers. Some of the best ones are. It can be all flowers. Planting natives, they're tough, they're perennials, they have great root structure, which is good for your garden. Use a lot of these plants as your structure plants. These are the ones that are going to be there and provide the structure, the bones for your garden for several years. As you move other plants around to rotate, you'll always have the structure of these fantastic perennial plants. They're heat and cold tolerant because they're Iowa natives. They can take last week's extreme cold. They can take next July's extreme hot because they're suited for a climate. As they mentioned, butterfly milkweed, the Monarda, the bee balm, spiderwort, prairie clover, the various coneflowers, the lobelia swamp milkweed, all great plants. And again, these can get your confidence up because they're easy to grow and they're hard to kill, and they come back every year on their own. Using chemicals wisely, wisely being the operative word. Read and follow label directions. If you look at the labels, a lot of them now have the ones that pull out. They're very small writing. I'll give you that. They can be hard to read. You can always go to a website or do what you have to do to read it well. Do not use more chemicals than recommended. I'm not saying don't use chemicals. I'm not saying use only chemicals, but use them as you're directed. More is not better. I think sometimes we think if I spray this weed with 3 times as much, it'll die 3 times as fast. Not a good idea. Use non-chemical options when possible. There's nothing better than pulling a weed or hoeing a weed. That can be more satisfying, actually, especially if you've had a bad day. Pulling weeds can be very cathartic. Don't expect perfection. We get a lot of calls here at Extension, people that want the perfect lawn. They want to live on the golf course where they, want no weeds, everything to be perfectly perfect. That's not real life. I say if you knew the amount of chemicals and time and money that golf courses spent to look perfect, you'd be amazed. So don't lower your standards, but have the correct standards for your lawn. Plant disease-resistant varieties of whatever you plant. That's going to help a lot too. They're going to be a lot healthier and they won't need the chemicals. Proper watering prevents many problems. Plants that are either too wet or too dry tend to get more diseases. So keeping your plants watered properly and your lawn. A drought brown lawn is going to get a lot more weeds. A lawn that is cut too short is going to get a lot more weeds and a lot more burn. So again, proper mowing height and those type of habits really help. So I think we're getting a lot smarter now about not shaving our lawns like we have in the past, but raising that blade a little bit, you're going to get a much, much healthier looking lawn with much less chemicals or no chemicals needed. And as she mentioned just before, one of our speakers, discarding diseased plants. Some plants should not be recycled and they should not be composted. If you have something that's been diseased or in the garden, you know, I know our natural inclination as gardeners is how can, you know, I'm going to throw it in the compost bin. Don't do that. Those actually need to go in the good old fashioned garbage and be gotten rid of. Or if you have you're in the country or a place of a burn pile, that might even be a better option. Increased mulching. Proper mulching is wonderful. It can reduce weeds. It can reduce watering because it holds more moisture in. It can increase the worms and the microbes underneath the mulch on the soil, which is wonderful for aeration and just overall soil health. It reduces spattering of soil. When you get a really hard rain and the rain hits it and bounces it back up onto, we see a lot on tomatoes and peppers where the soil will bounce back up and then stick and then cause a wound, then cause it to rot. You can also use mulch, by the way, in your pots to do the same thing. Reduce the weeds that might fall in, reduce watering. You won't increase your worms, but it will reduce your spattering also during a hard rain or water. So even in the pots on your patio or your steps or wherever, look into some mulch. And another kind of a shallower thing, mulch looks pretty. It actually makes it's instant gratification. When you planted everything in the spring, when your hosses are coming out and you can put a new layer of kind of mulch, it just is the finishing touch and can look great. Find the mulch that works for you. It's not one size fits all, depending on where you're mulching and what you're mulching. You can use straw, wood chips, grass clippings, shredded paper, store-bought or homemade mulch. Funny story I tell myself, I had a lawn that had a lot of creeping Charlie. So I was going to use the grass clippings on my small garden. So after mowing, I raked up a bunch of the grass and I put it on my garden. And a couple weeks later, I was amazed that my whole garden had turned to creeping Charlie. So note to self, don't put heavily chemically treated grass as mulch, and don't use weed-based lawns as mulch. So I learned my lesson. It took a lot to get rid of the creeping Charlie mulch that I created for myself. And this was after being a master gardener for several years. So it happens to everybody. Utilizing saved water. Again, going back to one of our earlier great presentations, the rain barrels are great. I have a kiddie pool that the kids utilize. Now this is a very small, the plastic, the under $10 one with the, it's orange and has fishies on the bottom and the kids play in it. This is not chlorinated. This is just hose water that is in there for a while. Usually after the kids are in it, there's a lot of grass in it and a lot of dead bugs and a lot of yuck. Before I dump it out, first of all, it's very, very hard to dump out a kiddie pool, so you're gonna end up bailing it out anyway. Save some of that. I use buckets. I will go around and fill up my watering cans and do a lot of watering just with the kiddie pool water. It's free. It prevents that wet spot when you do get to dump it on your lawn. And you can water. You'd be amazed how much water is in there. And it doesn't matter that it's not necessarily that clean. And your chemicals have dissipated. Buckets, if you don't have a place where you could utilize a true rain barrel, setting buckets out during a hard rain or even having 5-gallon buckets with close to the water spouts. If you don't have a lot to water, utilizing the buckets are going to be just miniature rain barrels. Rainwater is free. It doesn't go on your water bill. Your water bill is not going to soar. There are no city added chemicals, which is great. You don't have to wait for it to burn off and to be better. We did talk before, I know somebody mentioned mosquitoes. You want to prevent the mosquito farms, as I said, with netting. There's a lot of different things you could find, even adding a drop of bleach to kill those mosquito larvae, because you do not want your saved water to turn into a mosquito farm. That is not good for anybody unless you have a bat house. There is some question. People say using rain barrels for the vegetable gardens. There's some concern there with the chemicals that come off the roof. That is a concern. We can definitely recommend that it is great for flowering gardens. And just use some caution before you use it for your vegetable gardens. Questions? Josh, do you have the chat up?
Yes.
I'll put my information. Okay. And again, I am very reachable. I'm here at the Extension Office in Blackhawk County. We're here to serve you. So let us know as as we get closer to garden season, and we will be doing a seed giveaway. I'm going to do a little plug there. Look for more information on that coming in March, and probably doing the seed distribution starting in April. So lots of great seeds that we'd love to share with all of you. So questions? Thank you.